Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sanders Report. Today is October 28th, 2024, and today we're going to be talking about Donald Trump's most recent appearance on the Joe Rogan Podcast. If you've never checked out the Joe Rogan Podcast, let me just say you definitely should. It's fantastic. He is by far the best podcaster. He brings on such a wide variety of guests. He has scientists, comedians, politicians, authors. It's a really incredible show, and Joe Rogan does such a good job of having discussions with people and asking questions. And you can really learn a lot listening to him. And I think, especially with politicians, it can be super beneficial because you can actually lay out your policy, explain the context behind your positions. So much better than just the mainstream media version of debates and sound bites and just the rhetoric. Like, let's actually talk about policy and who you are and what you believe in. So I was extremely excited to see that Donald Trump was coming on there because I'd like to have more insight into Donald Trump. In 2016, Trump had all the right rhetoric. You know, he was all about taking care of Americans. He was about repairing the economy. He was calling out all of the fallacy behind the claims that the economy had recovered under Barack Obama, which never happened. It was basically carried along through artificially low interest rates, which allowed them to create the illusion of economic recovery that never happened. Now, that's a topic for a whole nother show because even under the Trump administration, I don't feel that the economic recovery was real. I believe, again, it was due to artificially low interest rates. The tax cuts helped in those initial few years, but you saw rising deficits during Trump's first administration. That can't be denied. Tax cuts were good, but you need to have coinciding spending cuts for that. Deregulation is good, and hopefully we'll see more of that in the future if Donald Trump wins the election. So let's get into some of the things that they covered. So far, the podcast has been viewed by approximately 28 million people, I think was the last number I saw earlier today. Probably more than that. I think the numbers that I saw were just for YouTube. So who knows how many people have actually consumed it, but hopefully more people tune in because I thought it was a really good interview, and I think Donald Trump did a really good job of making the case for why you should vote for him. One of the things that Donald Trump covered right off the bat, Joe Rogan asked him about some of the people that he brought into his administration. And Donald Trump admitted that he had made some mistakes, brought some people in that he probably shouldn't have. And in his defense, he said, well, I wasn't familiar with these people. I didn't know. And, you know, unless you're a political junkie or somebody that's ate up with it, kind of like I am, you probably don't know who some of these people are. Specifically, I remember John Bolton, who was discussed on the podcast. When Trump brought John Bolton in, I was thinking, okay, if he's going to drain the swamp, he's bringing the creatures from the swamp right in the door. And Trump acknowledged this. He said that one of his friends called him, who wasn't a politician, and said, I hope you're not bringing John Bolton in. He said, unfortunately, I've already hired him. But it was also funny because he said John Bolton was kind of the wild card guy. So whenever he was dealing with foreign nations, they would see John Bolton, and Trump said they would think, oh, God, what's he doing with this nut job? You know, because that's what John Bolton is. He's a neoconservative that wants to go to war with just about anybody that he can. So it was good to hear that Donald Trump was critical of John Bolton and some of the other people that, when I saw him in his first administration, turned me off. In 2020, I was a huge supporter of Jo Jorgensen, the Libertarian Party candidate. Unfortunately, she didn't receive any traction. And the Libertarian Party, unless they get it together, never will. I would say if I identified with any party, it would be the Libertarian Party. But what they need to do is they need to pick a candidate. They should have their candidate for 2028 right now. Because in order to actually get any support or traction for a Libertarian candidate, is going to require an educational revolution. People are going to need time to get acquainted with who that candidate is, actually learn and understand libertarian principles, and learn how those are going to fix the country. Because right now they just sound extremely radical and they freak people out. So unless the libertarians get it together and are able to get people to understand the principles of liberty and freedom and free markets, it's not going to happen. That being said, let's get back into the podcast. Trump followed up with claims of 60 Minutes altering their interview with Kamala Harris to give her a favorable portrayal in her recent interview. And I looked into this because I wasn't even familiar with the claim. Apparently, 60 Minutes had edited the interview that they did with her, and 60 Minutes stated that it was due to time constraints, which I don't believe is, too strange considering most interviews, I believe, last a long time, and then they go back and trim and edit. But I would say, given the circumstances and the criticism that 60 Minutes is receiving for the coverage, 60 Minutes could very easily post online the full interview and the transcript of the interview. And as of right now, they're refusing to do that. It just makes you wonder why. If they weren't trying to give her, a favorable view, why wouldn't they just release it? It seems like that would be pretty easy. And that's one of the things that Trump called out. But again, this was fact-checked by people that said that this was Trump making a false claim. We'll get into that too, because CNN did a really funny online article that I read about 32 things Trump lied about on the Joe Rogan podcast. But anyway, another thing, after they got past the 60 Minutes editing stuff, Trump went on to talk about tariffs very passionately. And I agree that you can use tariffs for federal revenue. However, given our current industrial and productive capacity, I see tariffs being more of a problem for the American consumer than beneficial. Yes, if we're allowed to basically restart our industrial and productive industries here, we could use tariffs to protect American jobs and increase American productivity. That would be great if we could get rid of income taxes and replace them with tariffs. Unfortunately, right now, our production and industrial base is very small, and I think a large increase in tariffs only makes prices go up for consumers, which affect sometimes the poorest Americans the most. But there's different views of thought on that. I'm typically more of a free trade guy, but actual legitimate free trade. That means not using large government, regulation like the World Trade Organization and all these other groups that basically create favorable conditions for multinational corporations to exercise and use free trade, but not smaller competitors that maybe can't take advantage of that. So Trump talked about tariffs, and then he started to talk about energy. Now, this is where I feel Trump has a huge edge on Kamala Harris, is energy policy. So, energy is super critical for increasing your productive capacity, because cheaper energy means you can produce cheaper, which means you can create your goods and sell them cheaper, and you can have actual growth. And like what he's talking about is deleveraging debt and deleveraging your economy through increased production, that's the best way to beat inflation, and that's the best way to create real economic growth. And cheap energy is vital to that. And the policies of the current administration, and really the platform of the Democratic Party, is very anti-energy. I just finished a book called Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. It's a great book, and it's talking about how, a lot of these policies that are being proposed by the left are, they're anti-human. They're anti-impact, and people fail to understand that the only reason that we have the lifestyles that we do, the reason that life expectancy has improved, the reason quality of life has improved is because we do impact our environment. And that's what we need to focus on. What are the benefits of fossil fuels? They're tremendous. They allow us to produce more food. They allow us to have better construction for buildings to protect us from, weather-related catastrophes. They the it's super crazy to think that we would ever impose hardship on ourselves we're talking like tremendous benefits from the use of fossil fuels. And that's what we need to do. We need to become energy independent. We need to have almost complete deregulation of the energy industry. And I'm actually super big on nuclear power. Trump actually was kind of not so big on nuclear. He said it's something that should be looked at, but nuclear power, one of the only reasons that it is so expensive is because of all the excessive regulation. And we look at the history of nuclear incidents, and people get super freaked out about it when it's actually still one of the safest forms of energy that there is, especially when you consider that there's no CO2, and so we eliminate the hazard of that. But either way, Trump was explaining how the environmentalism and the regulation is one of the greatest threats to the economy because it basically, it limits everything. And that's one of the reasons that we're getting killed by foreign nations in production, because they don't deal with all that. China's producing and building energy plants and not concerned with it at all. And we need to be following that same route. I mean, you can have responsible policy regarding, pollution and waste and things like that, but we're basically hamstringing ourselves because we're concerned about some, small environmental impacts. And like I said, I'm gonna follow this up with a more detailed show about the environmental stuff, but I don't want to get too off track. Another thing that Trump talks about is the refugee crisis in Springfield, Ohio. And he points out that he stated there was 32,000 migrants that had been dumped into Springfield, where everything I've looked at, it says 15,000. So that's maybe a little bit of a sensationalized claim. But still, 15,000 Haitians have been brought into Springfield, who their population is approximately 59,000. So that's pretty significant. If you think of a town with 59,000 people and then all of a sudden you get 15,000 migrants dumped in there, and I mean, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the services, they don't have the ability to basically take care of these people. And that's a serious issue. I mean, you want to be sympathetic to people that are trying to flee a country due to maybe civil unrest or instability, but also, we shouldn't be sacrificing ourselves for that. We shouldn't be lowering our standard or quality of life. Our number one job is to take care of people here. And I'm all in favor of immigration. We need more immigrants because we need a larger labor force. That's another way that you increase production. By having a larger labor force, you're able to produce more, and you're able to, grow an economy. So immigration is good. And like Donald Trump says, I think you do need to have some common sense restrictions, controls on immigration. You can't just have a wide open border policy and just let anybody in. That's not good for Americans overall. So they talked about that. Then they got into the weaponization of the justice system, and I don't think you can disagree with that. I mean, look at the way they've been coming at him with legal case after legal case, and the felonies that he was charged with. You know, you're looking at a state level misdemeanor for what was it? It was like it was falsified business records for payments that he made to Stormy Daniels. Okay, this is a misdemeanor in the state of New York. The only way it's a felony is if you're covering up another crime with the falsified business records. He wasn't covering up a crime. It was a non-disclosure thing. The only crime would be that Stormy Daniels is pretty ugly. You know, I'd say that's the biggest crime there is, you know, if that's who you choose to sleep with, that's a crime, because she's kind of a nasty woman. But they trumped up those charges, turned them into felonies, and each one of those felonies, when you look at, most people don't understand this. Each one of those felonies is just the payment, and then they're basically multiple charges for the same thing. It's for, you know, ledger entries and then the check. And there was another one. But either way, it's basically the payment multiple times over. And that's how they charged him with 34 felony counts of what should have been a state misdemeanor law, but they were able to say it was election fraud and however else they worded it in order to charge him with those felonies. Then they got into the Russian disinformation, you know, all the false accounts of, you know, the collusion with Russia, and, you know, all that stuff ended up being false. You know, which is crazy, because you had like all these intelligence agencies and different leaders from the intelligence agencies. They were out, they were saying 100%. There was collusion with Russia. You had the Hunter Biden laptop thing, which, you know, think about that. For like a year or so, people said, "Oh, that's conspiracy theory. That's a conspiracy." No, it was real. It was real. That was Hunter Biden's laptop, and there was incriminating video and incriminating emails and all this stuff tied to Hunter Biden. But remember, you had people from the CIA saying this isn't real, but it was. And they went on to talk about voter fraud, which is prevalent. I don't understand how anybody, and I think, don't get me wrong, I think voter fraud is prevalent in every election. Every election, I think voter fraud is prevalent on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats alike. Voter fraud is prevalent. I do believe in 2020, the way that we've increased these mail-in ballots and, you know, the early voting and everything else that we're doing now as a result of the COVID measures, which are still in place, even though that's no longer an emergency. We've really opened up the door for increased voter fraud. And speaking of the voter fraud, that's one of the funny things that CNN said Trump was lying about. So when they were talking about the voter fraud thing on the show, Trump was talking about this Jimmy Carter commission for voter fraud. And Trump said that the commission found that you can't have, I think the way Trump says, he said that they found that you can't have mail-in ballots. And basically, you know, think about that. Trump saying you shouldn't have mail-in ballots because that's going to increase voter fraud. And CNN said, this is false. This is false. But then if you read the fact check part of their false claim was, they said the commission actually found that absentee voting was the largest source of potential voting fraud. So they're acknowledging that absentee voting and mail-in ballots, absentee voting, they're acknowledging that the commission found that was the largest source of potential voting fraud. So by Trump saying that the commission found, you can't have mail-in ballots, they're saying he's lying. That's okay. So maybe he explained it differently. He explained it in his Trump way of explaining things. But that's not false. It's very accurate. They got into the JFK assassination information, because Trump had said he was going to release that. And then he kind of backtracked during his first administration and wasn't going to release the JFK assassination stuff because he said it was too damaging. I think he should have released it. And he says that he'll do it the second time around. That's one of those things. I don't know, will he? He said he was going to the first time and he never did. So who knows? If he wins, I guess we'll see if he's lying or not. I have my own views about the JFK assassination. I think that was kind of the day in this country when the coup was carried out, and I think ever since the JFK assassination, we've been kind of ran by a shadow state or secret government or whatever you want to call it. But I think that was the day that the intelligence agencies and people behind the scenes that are actually running things, I think that was the day they let the president know, or let all the people in government know, hey, if you don't play ball and do what we say, we will kill you in broad daylight, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I think this country has been downhill ever since the Kennedy assassination. So we could do I'll do a show on that too. And they kind of wrapped up the show talking about UFOs and information that Trump could release related to government UFOs. This is another thing I think is intentionally misleading people. I do not doubt for 1 second that some of these pilots have seen things that they can't explain. Because that's one of the things they talked about was these high-ranking naval pilots or Air Force pilots that have seen things that don't make sense. Well, I think that there's top secret stuff that probably these guys don't know about that is kind of shown to them. Not shown to them like we're going to show it to them, but the military knows when these guys are out doing their training exercises. They know when they're out doing maneuvers. So if we had some type of DARPA-ran project, which if you don't know what DARPA is, that's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They handle a lot of our top secret stuff that people don't know about, and when they hear about it, they think it's conspiracy theory, but they've got some pretty crazy stuff. And I think what they do is, if you've got a pilot out flying maneuvers and you've got some top secret type of, it could be just some super advanced drone technology, and you fly it out there and they see it and they think, well, we don't have anything like that. But it's just because they don't know about it. So then they don't know how to explain what they saw. And these are credible guys, these are credible, intelligent people. And if you show it to them, now all of a sudden you can start getting people thinking there is something, there is aliens. And I'm not saying that there's not aliens somewhere in the universe. Like, I definitely believe that there could be other life forms. But I do not think that we've got aliens here necessarily that are messing with us. What I think is you have governments that want to convince people that there's aliens here to create the idea of an existential threat. So at some point in the future, they can try to use that to propose some type of world government or world military or something to counter or fight that existential threat. But that's also a topic for another show. So before I get off, I'd like to talk about a couple of other things that CNN said were lies. They made a big deal. I guess Trump, I didn't even jot this down when I was listening because I was kind of taking notes as I was listening to the show, but they said Trump claimed that he built 570 miles of wall, but actually only 458 miles of the wall were built under the Trump administration, which I'm not even somebody that's big on the wall anyway. I don't really care. I think there's probably more efficient ways that you can secure the border. So I'm not even a big advocate of building the wall. I think you do need to have stricter border policies and a much more tighter secured border. But I don't think the wall will be very effective. So, but still, it's 112 miles. He said extra, and who knows? That's when you get into the whole damn lies, and statistics thing. It's like, well, actually, the other part wasn't completed till after he left office. I don't know what the exact specifics are, but it's not important. These are just the things that they're like really. So they said Trump was lying about China flying military bombers over Taiwan the day after he left office. And CNN comes in, they say, well, technically, it was on the third or fourth day of the Biden administration, and it was only 28 Chinese planes, not bombers, and they flew over the Taiwan Strait, not Taiwan. So that's what I mean. Like, you get these mainstream agencies that just like really nitpick the information and then say that something's false, kind of like they did to Joe Rogan with the whole ivermectin thing, when Joe Rogan was using ivermectin and some other drugs to kind of treat his COVID-19 diagnosis. And the media ran wild saying, Joe Rogan's telling people to take a horse drug. That's what they were saying about ivermectin. They were saying it was this horse. And don't get me wrong, it's an anti-parasitic, and it can be used for animals. Initially, it was used for animals, but it's been used in humans since 1987. And a lot of people still don't know that. I still hear people parrot that same misinformation about ivermectin. They say, oh, no, ivermectin's for animals. Joe Rogan was telling people to take animal drugs. And that's not true. It actually won the Nobel Prize in 1915, or it might not have been the Nobel Prize, but it was a Nobel Award or Nobel recognition for how great of a drug it is. It's one of the most prescribed drugs in the world because they use it in a lot of the developing nations and third world countries that don't have clean water, and it's an anti-parasitic, so a lot of these people that don't have access to a lot of clean water, they take it all the time. It's not even patented, so that's another thing. Drug companies aren't going to make a ton of money off of it because it's a cheap drug to make, which is, if I don't know if it's true or not, there's some people that say that's why ivermectin and some of the other drugs that some doctors were using to treat that, they say that was kind of pushed aside because they didn't want to use that because there was no money to be made by the drug manufacturers. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's definitely something to consider. So, but anyway, that's it. I'm going to wrap that up for today. If you haven't checked out the podcast, I suggest you do. You can listen to Joe Rogan on Spotify, or you can watch it on YouTube. And don't just watch Joe Rogan for the Donald Trump. I recommend watching him, all the time. I've heard some really good interviews, some really interesting people, and there's people on there that talk about things that I never would have thought I would find interesting, but he just does such a good job of asking people the right questions and kind of get like drawing out things to where you can be like, oh, that's cool. I never had heard of that. So really interesting show. So if you've never heard it, check out Joe Rogan. Check out the Joe Rogan Trump interview. Very good. And thanks for listening. Have a good day.